Peace. This is Wise for Wise Words Media, and it's official. Duck season is here to stay. Canelo Alvarez ducks Dimitri Bivol and a rematch in order to pursue a third fight with Gennady Golovkin. So, what I find very interesting about this third fight with Gennady Golovkin is because Canelo says that he's in his prime, that this is his time now, and that he just wants to challenge himself to be great. But meanwhile, he's taking on somebody who, out of his own mouth, said 3 years ago that Gennady Golovkin is no longer a challenge to him, and he's not interested in a third fight with him. So, some may say, oh, well, are you sure he said that? Well, let's check what he said. This is time-stamped. You could check this out on Bleacher Report. For those of y'all that can see, November 3rd, 2019. Bleacher Report. Canelo Alvarez goes on and says, the report goes on and says, Saul Canelo Alvarez has said two-time opponent Gennady Golovkin is not really a challenge for him, but the Mexican icon won't rule out a trilogy meeting if he considers it good business. Hold on to that thought. So now he says, move on to quote him, Canelo was asked about a potential third encounter with Golovkin following his win over Kovalev. Aragon Garcia of Boxing News 24 and said, he's not really a challenge for me. So this is Canelo talking about Golovkin. He's not really a challenge for me. I fought him 24 rounds and he's not a challenge for me. But if it represents business, why not? So this is why the man denied Golovkin a rematch or a third fight to get a definitive winner because the two first fights were in controversy. So in order to get a definitive winner, Golovkin signed to DAZN in order to get that third fight, to get a definitive win, for somebody to win definitively without any controversy. But Canelo at the time, because both fights were so even and so close and ended in controversy, Canelo got the victory that, he paid off. And then from there, he skated off and said, no, you know what? I'm not even going to consider this fight because he's not a challenge for me. So now fast forward 4 years later, 3 years after that comment, and now all of a sudden an older 40-year-old version of Gennady Golovkin presents a challenge to you? Come on, folks. We know what it is. We know the science. We know what's going on. So this man was clearly scared to run it back with Dimitri Bivol for a rematch. And this comes by way of Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn says that he went to play golf with Canelo after the Bivol fight. And he tells Canelo, listen, do you want the rematch with Bivol or do you want to take on Golovkin for the third time? And Canelo said he was weighing out the options. And Eddie Hearn said he had to tell him, listen, you have to be 100% sure if you're going to take the rematch with Bivol. Because a second loss, especially a back-to-back loss, there's no coming back from that. So after that dialogue between Canelo and Eddie Hearn, what was best for business was to pursue a third fight. All of a sudden, 4 years later, a third fight with a much older 40-year-old version of Gennady Golovkin. So you know what? That fight ain't going to be as easy as Canelo thinks it is. Canelo is going to find himself in another difficult fight with Golovkin. But this is him being caught between a rock and a hard place, and he had to go to the softer touch of the two, which is an aging, older Golovkin that's 40 years old, instead of a young, in his prime, Bivol that just beat the English out of him. You remember, dude was in the post-fight interview with Billy Joe Saunders when Demetrius Andrade came in and he was talking perfect English. And all of a sudden he kept talking perfect English, dropping MFs and all types of stuff. But then, after this fight, he had the Spanish interpreter. ¿Qué dijo? Like, now all of a sudden he don't even speak English after Bivol rocked the English out of him. So, with all that established, Canelo, the best thing for business was to take a third fight with Gennady Golovkin. And that fight will be in September 17th. And, I just want to close out by saying, this man is not even, he's not one of the, Eddie Hearn, you were sadly mistaken. I know you're fiended out to do and continue to do business with Canelo. And this is why you just said a week before the fight that with the fight with Bivol, Eddie Hearn said something like Canelo's the greatest fighter of all time. The greatest fighter of all time. This came out of Eddie Hearn's mouth. He is so desperate to continue business with Canelo that he said, lying out of his teeth, he know he don't even believe that. But he tried to say that Canelo is the greatest fighter of all time. But see how he tried to save himself, because the Friday after the weigh-in, he starts to step back from those words and he says, well, this is a very dangerous fight for Canelo. I don't like it for Canelo because Bivol is very big and skilled. So how could this man be the greatest, but you have no confidence with him going into a fight with somebody who weighs the same, who's in the same weight class as him? Because yes, Canelo may compete at 168, but he walks around at 190 pounds. And Bivol and his camp already said that when they're not fighting, Bivol walks around at 185, 187. So they're both the same size. In fact, Canelo, the night of the fight, you could see was even bigger than Bivol. So, Eddie Hearn, don't ever make a comment like that again. Don't ever do. Pay the zone, pay whoever you got to pay to get that off the internet. Because you never want to make it. You want to talk about the greatest? You got to say names like this. Muhammad Ali, when you going to talk about the greatest. When you want to talk about the greatest, you got to say names like Sugar Ray Robinson. When you want to talk about the greatest, you got to bring up names like Floyd Mayweather Jr. These are the type of names that can establish a dialogue that can be taken serious and into consideration. But when you want to take a name of a guy who has been trying to get a rematch with Floyd Mayweather for the past 2-3 years, trying to get a rematch with a 40-plus-year-old Mayweather who's already been retired, but meanwhile, he won't run it right back and get an immediate rematch with a guy that just beat him who's younger than his prime, it tells you a lot. The man Canelo, look at Sugar Ray Leonard. When he lost to Roberto Duran, he ran it right back. He didn't wait 4 years. He took about 4 or 5 months and ran it right back. When Floyd Mayweather, who won against Jose Luis Castillo, when he beat Castillo and he broke his hand in the middle of the fight and was fighting with one hand, and some people felt that Castillo won, he said we could run it right back. He gave him an immediate rematch and destroyed him the next fight. So that's what a real champion does. That's what somebody who you can put in the conversation of the greatest of all time. Guys like that make decisions like this. They don't go and fight guys 4 years later who out your own mouth, stated on Bleacher Report, out your own mouth, you said this guy's no longer competition for you. It doesn't present a challenge. But now all of a sudden, he's a challenge 4 years later when he's older, 40 years old. It ain't the challenge or the legacy he's after. It's a soft touch. He wants payday. He wants payday. So, with that, I'm out. Let's go Golovkin. Peace.